Welcome to the Moved to Meditate podcast. I'm your host, Addie D. Hilster. If you're a yoga practitioner or teacher who knows that there's more to yoga than poses, but you're wondering where to find that, come join our quiet little party. Here you'll find resources to help you deepen your practice, as well as insightful conversations with yoga, movement, and meditation teachers from a range of traditions. On this podcast, we spotlight the more contemplative aspects of movement practice. So we talk about all things gentle yoga, meditation, yin, restorative, yoga therapy, mindfulness, and more. Listen in and connect to a community of like-minded practitioners. Hello, everyone. This is episode 40 of the podcast. Isn't that a nice round number? I kind of can't believe we've been going this long. In today's episode, I'm going to be introducing July's deeper dive theme. And I think it will be another one that's really relevant in a mindful yoga practice, a meditation practice, and in general life. And that theme is focus. How we pay attention to where our attention is going, either in stillness and meditation or in a yoga movement practice or just going about our day. When we practice developing our focus, or you can also call it concentration, it becomes a really powerful tool to be able to have some choice in what we put our attention on. That can be really significant. It can have a huge impact on how we're feeling and where we're spending our time and energy. This is an important skill to have, whether you are dealing with physical pain that really takes up a lot of mental attention, or states like anxiety and worry that capture the mind, or if you're just struggling to process the intensity of the world and of news and politics. And if you live in the US, I would bet this is likely. Being able to shift and direct our attention is very important. Being able to discern what's worthy of our time, how to be purposeful and channel our energy towards compassionate action, sanity, change, taking care of the vulnerable, rather than getting worn down. That power starts with our attention. Before I fully go into this topic of focus, let me mention something that's coming up next month, which is actually pretty connected to what I was just saying. I am starting a new mindfulness meditation practice circle for yoga, wellness, healing arts, and caring professionals. It's basically for anyone who holds space for others and is feeling some level of burnout or isolation or feeling kind of lost in their work right now. For those of us who do this kind of work, like teaching or healing work, it's been a really challenging couple of years. Many of us have continued to show up out of necessity and hold nourishing classes and sessions for our students and clients, tending to their distress, while at the same time facing massive disruptions of our own. And that's just a lot to juggle. So this new mindfulness circle will not be a business mastermind or networking group or group therapy. It will simply be a practice time with others who do similar work. It will be facilitated by me, so it has a focus, and so it doesn't turn into like a rant session that just leaves you feeling yucky. This meeting is a chance to ground yourself in your meditation practice each week with a group that gets your experiences so you can bring your whole self, let down your guard, be seen and held, find the clarity you need within, and learn to use the contents of your work and life as opportunities to practice mindfulness and compassion. It's going to be a closed group with 12 people maximum for 6 weeks, starting July 26th. And all the further info about this is on my website on the live stream classes page, which is movedtomeditate.yoga/livestream-classes. And if you're curious about this, but you're not sure if it's for you, you can go to the website, movedtomeditate.yoga, and send me a message through that, and we'll talk further. Okay. So let's talk focus. Let's get into this deeper dive topic. So I'm using the word focus for the deeper dive because it's a nice short word, and who wouldn't want more focus? But this mental capacity of focus is also often referred to as concentration and referred to in other ways. And it's the domain of bringing our attention to a focal point in meditation, noticing when we wander, and then bringing our attention back again and again. That's how we train this capacity. And it goes all the way from simply following the breath or another simple anchor like that to deep absorption states that are described in the yogic and Buddhist meditation texts as dhyana or jhana and samadhi, those kinds of states that are possible with really deep absorbed concentration. Now, before we go too far, notice how you are feeling when you hear the terms focus and concentration. How do you respond? Like, what comes up? Is there any visceral sort of sense? Sometimes what will come up are feelings like grasping or tightening, or sometimes self-doubt, like, I'm not sure I can focus, or a sense of striving, like, I've got to get this. I need to learn how to focus. So just notice that for yourself. This topic can really bring those tendencies out. And so I've always really found it helpful when my teachers have brought in some softer ways to describe what we're doing with concentration or what we really want to be doing. And they'll say phrases like, instead of saying concentration, they'll say collecting our scattered attention or gathering the mind. Does that have a different resonance for you? It feels a little softer to me to gather my mind or to collect all the scattered strands of my attention and bring them into one place. So if that helps, because the word concentration sounds kind of tight and rigid, use something like that, gathering and collecting the mind. Because that tight, rigid feel is not a really helpful energy to bring to the practice. The focus that we're seeking actually comes more from relaxing and softening and letting our mind settle and rest with the chosen anchor. So it's not by trying to force ourselves to focus or to clear our mind or battle with our distractions. When we approach concentration in this more relaxed way, the benefits of it can include calming the mind. This aspect of meditation is sometimes called shamatha in Buddhism, which means calm abiding. The mind simply settles down over time as we invest less energy in distracting things and in the things that agitate or stimulate the mind. Like when you stop shaking a snow globe, when you shake it up and the glitter goes everywhere, but you put it down, you stop shaking it and put it down somewhere stable, like on a shelf, that snow glitter eventually sinks to the bottom of the container. But if you keep picking it up and moving it around, it keeps getting kicked up. So relaxing, settling the mind is allowing our attention to collect in one place and to not be like yanked around and stimulated and kicked up anymore. This is the single-pointedness aspect of meditation, focus, concentration, single-pointedness. And I'll talk a little bit in a while about how we can work with it also in asana, or the postural part of yoga. But concentration, focus, this single-pointedness is actually different than mindfulness, or sati, smriti, from the text. That's the word that's translated as mindfulness. And it might be helpful to just take a moment to disentangle the two terms of concentration and mindfulness, because they are often talked about together or even conflated, but they have some different functions to offer in our meditation practice. While the two qualities of mindfulness and concentration always intertwine and always support one another, which is probably why we get them mixed up, mindfulness is more of the awareness side of the practice, like the openness that's present, but not necessarily in a single-pointed way. Mindfulness is more receptive and often spacious, and it's like more of our capacity to explore and investigate our experience in the present moment. So that's a little bit different than single-pointed concentration. Imagine if you're meditating and there's a bunch of noise outside. Concentration would be the capacity to just come back to the breath and let that noise be there in the background. Otherwise, we'd call it a distraction from the concentration perspective, because concentration needs to exclude anything that's not the anchor. From a mindfulness perspective, you could shift your attention to the noise and notice the noise itself and how it works and how it arises and passes, and notice your reactivity to the noise. And in that way, from the mindfulness perspective, there's no such thing as a distraction because mindfulness includes everything. So you can see how we need both, and both concentration and mindfulness are essential, but they are a little different. They're kind of like just different lenses that we practice with. And sometimes our meditation emphasizes one or the other. And often we need to get steady first with some concentration, some ability to focus in order to effectively practice mindfulness. So now that we have established some of the terms and definitions, let's come back to the power of having some sense of choice about where we place our attention. Because what we put our attention on strongly affects how we experience life. And that's putting it pretty clearly, right? It strongly affects how we experience life, what we are paying attention to. It matters. So how about we look at that by nerding out on some neuroscience for a moment? There's a group of structures in your brain that scientists call the default mode network. This term was coined in the early 2000s and it got a lot of attention following a 2010 article by Killingsworth and Gilbert called A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind. Around about that time that came out, all the meditation teachers were talking about it. So A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind, the name of the article. And I'll put some links to these items in the show notes if you want to look into it further. But this research by Killingsworth and Gilbert showed that when we're not occupied with a task, our minds tend to drift to unpleasant, stressful forms of thinking, which lights up certain brain structures. And that's why they called it our default mode. These are the areas of the brain that have to do with self-referencing and future thinking and going over past memories, wondering what others think. The relationship with the more positive side of daydreaming and creativity is still unclear, but there's a lot of evidence that the mind wandering gets us into trouble. That Killingsworth-Gilbert article, A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind, starts with this quote. Unlike other animals, human beings spend a lot of time thinking about what is not going on around them, contemplating events that happened in the past, might happen in the future, or will never happen at all. Indeed, stimulus-independent thought, or mind wandering, appears to be the brain's default mode of operation. Interesting. Can you relate to that? That tendency to let our mind wander away from what's actually happening around us in the present moment. There is another set of structures in the brain called the task positive network, or TPN, and it's also known as the dorsal attention network. These parts of the brain engage when we get involved in a task, and they are present moment focused. My understanding of this is that only one network can be active at a time. So that might be part of the reason some of us feel less anxious or stressed when we keep busy, perhaps. Of course, that strategy could have some limitations for our self-care, but it speaks to the way that activating our task positive network could help pull us out of the default mode network when we're feeling stuck there. And what are we doing in meditation? Giving ourselves a single-pointed focus and deliberately returning to it over and over. That activates our task positive side and it trains us away from mind wandering. So let's look at some nuts and bolts of practice. What is an anchor in meditation, right? I think I used that term already in this talk, an anchor. Your anchor is the focal point that you choose and that you keep bringing your attention back to. Some people call that the object of meditation, but I like anchor better. And I think partly because I like this visual image of an anchor that kind of steadies the ship. The anchor generally needs to be something that's here in the present moment. Common ones are the breath, and sometimes that could be with using a mental note, like in when you breathe in and out when you breathe out. Or sometimes counting the breath can help. Those really help our concentration. Other anchors could be feeling sensations in the body, like in a body scan meditation. Or we can actually use sounds. We can actually use whatever sound, if we don't label it as noise, that's in the environment and really let that be our primary focus. Or it could be a mantra, or it could be meta phrases, or some people use visual focus points. So it's something that we can bring our attention to in the present moment, and sometimes take some experimentation to figure out what anchors work best for you. So that's why we have a lot of choices with anchors. The anchor also needs to be simple. To train the mind to settle down and get less excited about distractions, we need to simplify and narrow down what we're paying attention to. I realize that might sound kind of boring. That might actually be kind of boring, and that is okay. If it was super exciting and stimulating, it would not work to settle and calm the mind down. We are embracing that boring ordinariness and simplicity as an exercise so we can teach our minds not to chase after absolutely everything. It's kind of like training a puppy, right? They want to chase everything. They want to chew on everything, and we have to train them to be a little more mature. As you're meditating with the anchor, your thoughts will continue being there. You can place your attention on your anchor and just let your thoughts be in the background. Don't try to get rid of them. Really, you're just going to expend a lot more mental energy trying to figure out how not to think, which is a total trap. So just keep placing your anchor in the spotlight or in the foreground of your attention, and don't worry about those thoughts being in the background. Every once in a while, or to be realistic, every 2.5 seconds on some days, a thought will really jump into the spotlight and kind of come crowd out your anchor. And that's okay. You just recognize that you're thinking and you reset again. You go back to the anchor. Sometimes it'll be after 5 minutes of getting into a whole big mental saga before you realize that you're lost in thinking. And that is very, very, very normal. So you can just relax and renew your attention on the anchor a million billion times. That's how it works. It's not easy, but it is worth it. We've talked a lot about focus so far in the context of sitting meditation, but what are some of the ways we can encourage focus or non-distraction during yoga or movement practice? In some ways, that's actually more challenging because we don't have that utter simplicity of just sitting and paying attention to one thing. We're moving, we're feeling sensations change, maybe listening to instructions, maybe seeing other people. It's just a more complex task. All of those things also tend to bring up thoughts. So one thing I like to do is experiment with designating an anchor for the practice. Like I might say, today I'm going to keep coming back to my feet. And it won't be an exclusive focus. You have to pay attention to a number of things as you're practicing yoga or movement, but it'll be a refrain, like the chorus of the song, and you keep coming back to the feet. So you just remember, okay, I'm going to check in with the feeling of my feet as many times as possible during class. So it's kind of like your anchor, and you keep practicing placing your attention there. And it is just a way of practicing that skill of placing your attention somewhere specific, somewhere that you've chosen. I do this all the time in the classes I teach by choosing a physical focal point like the hips or the shoulders or wherever and organizing the whole class around it. We'll do all kinds of different movements and awareness practices to bring our attention to that part of the body. And that's partly just to help give us a focal point and develop concentration. You could definitely do that with the breath, right? And that's probably the most common focal point that we use in yoga. And it might help to really name that intention of this is a focal point, and part of the reason that I'm bringing my attention back to the breath is to develop my concentration. So we keep coming back to the breath. Keep noticing when you're not breathing or when you've gotten overly focused on something else, like comparing your pose to your neighbors. And then in a more general way, we can become observers of where our attention goes during yoga practice. Just to notice how much thought is coming up, what kinds of thoughts, what pulls us away from the present moment. Are there certain poses that really get our wheels turning? Like, do you start criticizing yourself during balance poses or planning during restorative poses? We can notice what's going on, and then what do? We come back, we return to that task at hand. And an effective yoga practice, by the way, is also going to do a lot to balance your nervous system, which will greatly help your mind settle and calm. Focus and concentration benefit very clearly, very much from a stable nervous system. To sum up, kind of going back to where I started with this, practicing concentration or focus, we learn that we can move our attention onto things and we can move our attention away from things, like moving away from pain sensations or harmful thoughts or worries or self-judgments or anything that we're fixated on, because sometimes we just need to change the channel. Sometimes we need to let the mind rest. And this practice gives us more choice about that. It also empowers our presence. Our ability to be mindful is sustained by this gathered, focused mind. For example, if I want to sit with someone and pay attention and listen to them, take them in, that capacity to be present with them relies on having the mental stability or non-distraction to keep my attention there, rather than going off into my own thought world or picking up my phone and scrolling and half listening to them. So focus connects us to our steadiness and our clarity. Having our attention be less pulled and jerked around also really helps us to be more discerning, to be less confused, to stay more on our path and to stick to our wiser intentions. So I hope this reflection on focus has been helpful to sort of get you pondering how you might work with it. It is a practice. It is a process. So be patient with yourself and you'll see the benefits. Feel free to reach out to me anytime with your comments or your questions on this or any other topic that we have talked about on the podcast or that you would like for us to talk about on the podcast. I'm really looking forward to exploring and deepening this skill of focus with you over the next month. Thanks so much for being here and for your practice. P.S. I'm back. I almost forgot to mention that since this is our deeper dive topic for July, there will also be deeper dive worksheets that go along with this podcast episode on focus. So the worksheets are free, and if you would like to receive them in your inbox during the first week of July, just make sure that you're on my mailing list, and you can go to movedtomeditate.yoga or find the link in the show notes to sign up for the email list and get all of the different resources like the creative explorations on the worksheets and also guided meditations later in the month with choice of anchors and some different exercises you can practice to develop your focus and concentration. So thank you for tuning in today, and go sign up for the newsletter if you are so inclined. So that's today's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with a friend and/or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and help others find us that way. To learn more about my work, the Moved to Meditate class library, live online classes, teacher trainings, and private lessons, go to movedtomeditate.yoga. Thanks so much for listening.